minute or a second here before we're streaming live.
If you hover over your picture and three little dots come up, you can click on that and you can rename and you can just add comma trustee to your name.
Okay, appears to me that we're streaming live. And give me one
that
sec.
sounded good. I heard a beep, a bell.
Yeah. And we're good.
All right. It is now 6:03 by my clock, and I hereby call the January 2021 meeting of the Albany Public Library Board of Trustees to order. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I'd like to turn the floor over to Melanie Metzger, the Assistant Director of the library, who will explain how this works and how to make a virtual comment.
Okay, so we are live on YouTube. So if you're watching us, welcome, or you can watch the video afterwards. We accept public comment via email through the system. Rebecca Delgazo will be monitoring that email account throughout the meeting, and there'll be a section at the beginning and at the end that we will answer said emails. The email for that is publiccomment@albanypubliclibrary.org. Once again, that is public comment, publiccomment at Albany Public Library, all one long string, .org. At this point, Rebecca, do we have any public comment?
We have not received any public comment at this time.
All righty. Well, thank you both. I'd like to just announce for anyone who will be watching this now or in the future, all but one trustee will be present tonight, and the trustee who will not be present is excused. So we've all identified ourselves on the Zoom meeting by saying whether we're a trustee or if we have some other role, which is great. Thank you very much. And we should advance to our agenda. Our consent agenda tonight contains 3 items. Is that going to display on our Zoom? No? Rebecca's saying no.
Mr. Finn, according to the agenda, we're actually going to have a presentation first.
Oh, gosh, I have the wrong thing then. Oh, okay.
You might need to refresh your board docs if you're in board docs. But yeah, we're having a collection management services presentation by Stephanie Anderson.
Wonderful. Thank you. Sorry about that, folks. We'll get to the consent agenda after the presentation. And let me go get into board docs. I was using a printed.
Are we ready for said presentation then? Okay, let me share my screen then with you. One moment. And do you see the presentation now? Try now. Now we do. Okay, so fabulous. So welcome everybody. As stated before, my name is Melanie Metzger and I'm the Assistant Director, and I will let Stephanie introduce herself.
Unmute. Hi, I'm Stephanie Anderson. I'm the head of the Collection Management Services Department.
And this is just a little overview of what the department does. Stephanie is the head of CMS. I oversee the department and some of the processes that it goes through. So we'll talk together about what CMS does and what we've been doing this last year and where we look to go to in the future. So to start off, what is collection management services? So oftentimes you'll hear us refer to this as CMS, just because collection management services tends to get a little wordy. It's pretty much, we deal with the whole life cycle of the book. So that's everything from the selection of the book, looking at the reviews and what's hot, and looking at data analytics and such, to acquiring the book, that's the purchasing of the book and getting it into the cataloging system, which is part of the processing and cataloging, to the shelving, where it's going to be, what branch it's going to reside in, where in the branch it's going to reside, how it's checked out, 7 days, 14 days, 21 days, the reshelving. If there's any repair or maintenance that has to be done on the book, that comes back to CMS department. And then we go all the way through the cycle of the book has reached its end of life, is how we like to say it. And it either gets removed from the collection, which is the weeding, it gets reassigned to another branch if it's used in another branch a lot more, or it gets replaced if it's one of these grubby books that gets destroyed by overuse, which physical materials tend to do. So our primary roles of the CMS department here at Albany Public Library, we oversee and manage the material spending budget, which is a nice chunk of the budget. Thank you guys very much. The selection and acquisition of said books, so that we go like I said before, everything from the reviews, selecting which materials fit for what locations, the ordering, and we have multiple vendors that we order through. So some are a little easier to work with than others. And then everything from the cataloging of the book, and we'll discuss these all a little bit more in detail, the processing, and then the evaluation of the use, how it's working, how is it living, did it work for our community, are people checking it out, or is it just sitting on our shelves? Is it checking out a lot and we need more copies? So it informs how we purchase books in the future. And then we even discuss in tandem with the branch librarians and the heads of branches, we work on weeding the collection. So which items aren't circling anymore or have circled way too much and we need to remove because they might be dirty, shelving, and the merchandising of the collection. So everything from how it's displayed, how we get the people to know that we have these books available to check out. So I'll turn it over to Stephanie now.
So the first step is selection and acquisitions. Selectors are assigned genres and formats to purchase for all of the APL branches. APL selectors do use a variety of tools to purchase the materials for the collections. Currently within the CMS department itself, we have 5 members of staff. All 5 members select. We have 9 total selectors for physical materials at APL. And when I talk about physical materials, I mean the books and the various genres, adult, juvenile, YA, but also CDs, DVDs, and the alternate formats within, and like audiobooks, Wonder Books. The variety of tools that we use to purchase the materials with our vendors, specifically with Ingram, we have a program called iCurate, which is wonderful. The Ingram is a large publishing company. They send us curated lists of the future pre-releases, the things that they're getting from the publishing companies of what are going to be the big titles. And we make sure we're looking at those curated lists and picking up copies of those books. We also get notification cards from Baker & Taylor. Baker & Taylor is our second large book vendor. And again, Baker & Taylor is getting information from the publishing companies. They're sending us these notification cards. So we're making sure that if there's a Nora Roberts or James Patterson or Baldacci, it's on a list, we get it. We consider those our pre-pub lists, our pre-publication title lists. We also use book list, school library journal, Kirkus. One of our selectors for fiction is really into podcasts, and she'll follow Twitter feeds of specific authors, and authors blurb other authors. So we're using a lot of social media, making sure that we're not missing anything. So there are a lot of review sources that our staff are constantly accessing to make sure that we're not going to miss anything that our community might be interested in. And to make sure that we're ordering on time, we have a monthly ordering cycle. So materials are ordered monthly to make sure we're maintaining current materials for our patrons. And the acquisitions part, I consider this separate because it is so detail oriented and it's really awesome. We can order through Sierra, through our integrated library system. from Sierra directly to Baker and Taylor and to Ingram. It's a process called EDI. So we send the order record. We can also track our budget and our encumbrances and the accruals. Chris is gonna yell at me, the official word. And then we also have the receipt and the order record right in Sierra. And it's in this way through that acquisition process that we'll also simultaneously get bibliographic information back from our vendors. So the fact that we have this acquisition set up with Baker and Taylor, Ingram, and Findaway, it takes out one hard step of the ordering process, and it's great, but it is very detail oriented. The processing. So this picture shows you just a glimpse. This isn't all of it. When CMS staff returned to Washington Avenue after the shutdown, we had over 56, 57 cartons of books that we started to receive of all the materials that were ordered prior to the shutdown. So these tables are where we had started to sort out just the adult fiction of titles that had been released February, March, April, May. So in 2020, CMS staff received, processed, and cataloged over 17,000 items. These are the items that we got just through our acquisitions process, just the things we ordered through Sierra. This total does not include the materials that we got through our non-EDI vendors. So some of the things that we have to special order and then process by hand. So we have more of those. I think in total, we touched about 17,800 items. So processing includes receiving the items in Sierra, location, date, and stamping, adding barcodes, adding spine labels, adding genre labels, adding location stickers. Within processing, we are also verifying the contents of each carton and making sure the books in the box match the books on the shipping invoices and the packing slips. For example, we'll get boxes of books that aren't our books. They belong to Albany Public Library in Albany, Oregon. That happened last week. We have manga that is not our manga, so now we have to send it back. Nothing comes to us from our vendors 100% shelf ready, and processing is half of the process. The second half of what we do to get items shelf ready is the cataloging. So cataloging is the coding that adds an item to Sierra. CMS staff create an individual item record in Sierra for an item once it's received. We verify and edit the bibliographic record in Sierra. We also add necessary description or subject headings, detail and information about that book. So it's the processing and the cataloging that make it possible to search for an item in Sierra or Encore and then locate it physically in the library. And this is an example. I wanted to find a way to give you guys an idea of what it looked like. So each of these little fields in this first image up on the top left, that's the item record in Sierra. So CMS staff create an item record when they add a barcode. Then they have to connect it to the bibliographic record, which is what you see on the right-hand side. We also have our location code information, our genre information, what's going to be on the call number, where it's going to live in the building, how much the book costs, and how it goes out, how it circulates to the public. On the right-hand side, we have our machine readable cataloging record. CMS staff also edit this. This is where you have your subject headings. So for this book, it was a YA book, and so you make sure you have your specific subject headings so staff can find it. It's a lot of coding. And this one, I posted a picture of what patrons see when they search for the item in Encore. So it's a more readable version of everything that we have entered, the location that it lives in. So the very top example would be Arbor Hill, West Hill, the call number Y, LAC, that means it's a YA book, and the author's last name, the status, it's available in the branch. On the right-hand side, that's the result of the processing. That's a shelf-ready book. It has its new sticker. It lets staff and patrons know it's new. It's stamped on the top, so we know when it came in. It has our location code stamp. It also has our YA sticker, which tells staff where it lives in the building, and the barcode that is attached to that specific item. Combined, the cataloging and the processing, this is the end result. This is a shelf-ready book that is now findable and searchable in both Sierra and in Encore for our staff and our patrons. All right, the fun part, evaluation of collection use. We are focusing a lot right now at APL on using patron-driven acquisition tools to evaluate how our collection is getting used. On the left-hand side, I have from Collection HQ, which is the software that we use. This is a great chart. It's from December 2019 to December 2020, and it tells me that our highest circling collection was the juvenile picture books. That little dot on the top right-hand corner, picture books circulated 14,512 times out of a collection that totals 20,789 items. So when I look and evaluate the budget quarterly, I make sure that I can move money back into that picture book budget because I know picture books are the healthiest collection. They're the top circulating collection, and they're the most popular collection. And then on the right-hand side, this is something else that we run monthly, our top author charts, making sure that we're buying our top authors, we have our top authors, and what patrons in Albany are really using. So patron-driven acquisition really helps us to make sure that we're getting what our patrons are interested in, and we can also evaluate what they're not interested in and then look at why. Why isn't something circulating? Is this a conversation that you have with branch staff about how do we have to move a collection, or is underwater basket weaving just not interesting? So this software helps us sort of identify those collections.
And then we have some additional duties. We've kind of been very book focused in our conversation today, but we also do e-content purchasing. So all of our e-books, e-audio, e-video, and such. And we do that for both APL and Upper Hudson. So we are given a chunk of money to help with their collection. And since we're the largest library system library district in the system, they've turned that over to us. We also handle periodical and subscription services, so all the magazines and anything else that we subscribe to, such as those materials that are published annually. That's handled through the CMS department. We coordinate database purchasing and any running of the databases through Upper Hudson. The majority of our databases are Upper Hudson owned or New York State owned, but we have the administration rights should we need to do anything that's APL specific. And we actually do have a couple APL specific databases now. We do have Ancestry, which is available to APL patrons as of January 1st. And then another one we do often is the Newsbank, which is the Times Union archives. It's taken over from the microfiche. That's how we access past issues of the Times Union now. We coordinate the museum pass purchasing. So this is kind of get you into some of the other stuff that we deal with that aren't book or material focused. So we coordinate all of those. And then the library of things, which is stuff like our hotspots, our fishing poles, and anything else that's not what you would normally consider a library to be loaning out, but now they do. So we're looking at some of our past and current projects that we've been doing. We realized that it had been at least over 20 years, I think we determined that we had done an inventory of our collection. So actually seeing, hey, do we actually own everything that we've purchased, or has some of it over the past 20 years disappeared? So we are in the end stages of finishing up that inventory. The pandemic actually helped and hindered us in the completion of that project. But that's helping us to clean up the data as well. And it's been very helpful because now items that are showing available in the system that actually aren't available because they're missing are gone. And items that have shown up as missing in the catalog are now found because we did find items that were just misplaced in other parts of the library. As we stated, we're really diving into the analytics of collection use regarding our find free and missing and build. I did the memo back a couple months ago on that. And so we have, we actually have more items. There was a concern that we had more items missing than were out legitimately, and we found out it was just the opposite. We actually have a lot of items that are checked out that just haven't come back to us. And then we have over the last 2 years done a shift from branch level ordering to centralized ordering. Stephanie mentioned we have 9 selectors in the organization at this point. I believe it was 42 or 43. that we had previously. So when you think about going from 42 individual people selecting items for APL down to 9, that's a huge shift. And because of that, we did a revamp of the personnel in the department. It used to be a librarian 2, a librarian 1, a library assistant, and then clerks filling out the remainder of positions in the department. And now we have library assistants, librarians, and the librarian 2. And this allows us to have everybody in the department able to order the books and to be trained on such. And then we're updating the staff training binder for improved APL cataloging standards, because now we have the ability for more people in the department to catalog as well, where we only had 1 or 2 people beforehand.
Okay, so for upcoming projects and initiatives, we are going to continue with staff development on selection, cataloging, and the collection evaluation processes. As Melanie just stated, we do now have library assistants also helping us with selection. So we are constantly working on professional development and training. In the future, we will be doing a diversity audit of our collection. This will be CMS run, and we're going to start with smaller collections first. And then go through and work our way through to make sure that we are building a diverse, equitable, inclusive collection for the community. CMS is also going to start helping to improve readers advisory, including some increased collaboration with our public information office in order to just promote new releases and some other ways that we can help our staff and our librarians with what is in the collection and how to promote and advertise those with our patrons. We are also currently going to be updating the material selection policy to reflect APL's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our material selection policy is quite outdated, so we're going to work on changing the language to make sure that this is now part of our policy in terms of acquisitions for when we're making purchases.
So that concludes our presentation, and we are open to questions. Should anybody have any questions for us at this time? I know it's a lot to process. So, Jenna.
In the conducting of the diversity audit, I'm just wondering what sort of overarching questions you're asking about the collection. Like, what areas of diversity are you looking to improve the collection?
For example, a collection I was going to pitch to the small working group that's going to help me plan it, focusing on first like the children's picture book collection. We have youth services staff in each building. We have very excellent youth services staff in each building to go through and look at each picture book. And then we would actually decide the categories that we're looking through. And it would also include diversity amongst the author, the illustrator, and the main characters, because you're looking for Black, Indigenous authors and characters of color, but you're also looking for neurodiversity. And then you're also looking for especially even with the adult collections, LGBTQ plus representation. So sort of covering those bases. When you look at the literature for diversity audits, those are sort of the main things that you're covering. And also, is it a main character of color or is it about a historical event and then making that differentiation? Because there is underrepresentation, a lot of the books that feature children of color or children who are Indigenous, it's around a historical event. The main character just doesn't happen to be expressing that. And you want to make sure that you're building that into the collection so that your readers are seeing a reflection of themselves. And we thought the children's picture book collection would be a great way to start because it is our most heavily used collection. And also get the basis going forward. You sort of evaluate how you did and what you learned to apply that to the other collections going forward. So we hit everything. I hope that answers it.
Thank you. That's very informative.
Anybody else? Matthew.
I forgot how to raise my hand on Zoom. I panicked. I raised my physical hand. Thank you. The presentation was really great and very insightful, provides a lot of insight for us. I'm wondering how or if we're planning to respond to our foreign language readers in the community. of which I am one, actually. I tend to cycle through novels in the 4 languages that I can read fluently. But also I'm a teacher of people who are learning English. That's my job. So I really want them to be able to use the library as a great resource. For instance, if a mom or an auntie really maybe going to take a long time to learn enough English to read, but wants some reading material, how can we address that?
We have a reference component built into our budget. And with English as a second language and materials for English language learners, that is something that we do look at purchasing every year. We evaluate how the collection is getting used, but also the age of collection. Because right now, Matt, the problem that we have is it's the same materials over and over again. So it's finding new materials for those collections. I ran into this when I was the branch librarian at North Albany, trying to get ESOL resources for the academy next door for the Albany International Center students coming into North Albany. We're asking for those types of materials. And you find it's not that the library doesn't have them, it's they're not being published. So it's constantly looking for different publishers and different resources. So that's something that is always on our radar. And we work with a lot of our subject specialists who used to order to seek out those materials. And the problem is with the budget, sometimes the constraint is the collection gets condensed or it's at one location. So the primary location for those materials right now is Washington Avenue. And it would be a question in the future, should that collection shift to another location based on where those patrons are going? Or do we find a way to split the location for access and equitability? But right now, the bulk of that collection does live at Washington Avenue. And it's just a case of making sure that we're updating it when newer materials are available. And the challenge is always finding the materials.
And I know the second part of what you're questioning was the actual books in other languages adding to the collection. And we do have a small Spanish collection at Delaware and a small collection in Mandarin, I believe.
The Chinese collection is at Pine Hills.
Is at Pine Hills.
But right now we're not able to order from China currently. And Xiaofei hasn't been able to go down to the city to get books in Chinese like she used to.
And that was going to be my statement on that, is it's been very difficult to get the foreign language materials.
Sure, it's a big process. Yeah.
But we have added to the Spanish language budget because we did work with the librarians at Delaware and Washington, and we realized the collection hadn't been added to. It hadn't been purchased for. So we do have now one of our specific selectors is focusing only on the Spanish collection for Delaware and Washington Avenue. And we have been adding new materials to that collection. And then the challenge becomes cataloging it and making sure we're doing it right, because no one in CMS speaks Spanish. So it's having to work remotely with our Spanish selector to make sure that we're doing it correctly. But yeah, no, we've been adding to that now quarterly. Even with the pandemic, we've been able to purchase new materials for those collections.
Oh, nice. Yeah, and it's not easy to do, I know. It's an ongoing, long-term project. Yeah. But I'm also wondering, are you kind of doing community surveys? Like I know Farsi might be popular with our communities. Arabic would certainly be popular. So are we reaching out to the community to find out, like in the future, what we could start to add more of? Even though I know it takes a long time, it's really hard. But is that part of what you're doing?
I think with the surveys, that is something that would be covered with the annual survey that the library always does. I believe the Public Information Office always includes a collection related question, but we haven't discussed that yet with us. But we do have patrons who do relate to staff that they have titles that they're interested in, and staff submit those emails to me. And then when I can purchase an item, I do. Unless it's something that's too esoteric or something that would really be like at the university level where they could access that material through ILL. If it's something that's probably only going to be used once by one patron, we have a hard time making that purchase. But if we know that it's something that the community at large would be interested in, we do make those purchases. But I think in terms of a survey, unfortunately, I don't know that that's my department specifically. It would sort of have to come from like the next step up.
But this also probably would all be included in the diversity audit that we're doing, because language barriers would also be included in those.
And I would just, and thank you, that's great. I would just recommend that the surveys themselves be available in multiple languages, including those that are popular in our immigrant and refugee community. But that's the next.
We're working on it.
Thank you so much.
Anything else?
Hi guys.
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. Can you talk a little bit more about Library of Things and what are the considerations for adding things to the collection? And are they also related? Are they circulating yet? Or are they still not because of the pandemic?
Library of Things started a few staff members ago with guitars and guitar amps and speakers. And then also hotspots are considered a thing. Any of the charging cables are considered a thing. Same with the fishing poles and the museum passes. Right now, we have put a pause on adding any new Library of Things to the collection. That was something I was going to address with the services committee, but then of course COVID happened. I know that, are the hotspots being worked right now?
The hotspots are being circulated right now, but everything else is, because it's a little difficult for cleaning and usage. Yeah. Making sure they're sanitized when they come back. Those are items that are a little bit more difficult, such as the guitars and musical equipment. I know that musical equipment's big at Howe right now. And we're looking at them for acquisitions according to branch and community. So like Howe had a big music program going on. So that's why we started doing the music equipment at Howe. Fishing poles happened way before I came on, so I don't know what the impetus was for including the fishing poles, but we have been taking a look at some other things, and that does include the makerspace. The material in the makerspace, while it doesn't circulate because it's heavy equipment that needs calibration and stuff, it still did go through a process with CMS, with purchasing and stuff. It wasn't just like those conversations with all that material has gone through with both IT and CMS.
Right, but the services committee had hinted again pre-COVID that we're looking at adding different types of materials because patrons had asked for different types of materials. And some of the surrounding library systems do lend puzzles. They lend board games. They lend cooking appliances, or not appliances, but bakeware.
The pink pens, yeah.
And so it was going to be a discussion that was going to be had. And then unfortunately, the pandemic hit. So it's sort of taken a back burner, but we still do have things that I think museum passes are still.
The museum's passes, I believe, are still circulating with a caveat because they have to contact the individual museum to find out what their restrictions are. And I know we did because this conversation was happening right at the cusp of the beginning of the pandemic. We actually did purchase what was it? It's a little device that you plug into your car to find out what the little codes in your car means. Because we had people asking for that. We purchased 2 of those, and we're getting ready to circulate them, but then we shut down. So I know staff has technically known about it. Borrowed it once in a while, but yeah, that was one.
There's like anything that isn't a traditional item, we sort of had to put it into a classification. I'm part of the Upper Hudson cataloging committee. And so for anything that isn't our traditional form of media, we call a thing. It's a library of thing. And that's another way that we can classify it within the database without the database getting completely cluttered. I think the newest thing that we have to figure out how to catalog is it's a removable hard drive that has all of the Times Union digital archive on it. And we have to figure out how to enter that into Sierra, and then how staff are going to access it for patrons who want to come in and access all those back issues of the Times Union. But yeah, so it's a future discussion I think we're going to have. It's just right now the timing because of safety issues with lending.
Well, So on that note, I will turn the meeting back over to Matthew. Thank you very much, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much. Really, really
Thank you,
nice
Stephanie.
to hear and learn about. Thank you both so much. Now we're going to go to our consent agenda. And here we go. So we have 3 items in the consent agenda that we would all vote on together as one, unless anyone wants to set any item aside. So hearing no desire to do so, has everybody had a chance to take a look at the minutes? I do just want to point out that Rebecca, perhaps, I don't know who else exactly, but perhaps Scott and Melanie, maybe Stephanie, I'm not sure who, but a lot more detail was added to the minutes for December, and I think it's just wonderful, and I think it's a great format to use. And I wanted to get a plug in for people helping out with making sure those minutes provide the information that we're looking for. That said, we're looking for a vote on the consent agenda. We need a motion on the floor. So, motion to approve. Thank you so much. Who was that now?
Karen.
I couldn't see it. It was Karen. Yeah, I thought that was your voice.
Brenda, second.
Flashed off my screen. Oh, so Brenda's going to second. We just thank you so much, both of you, and let's take a quick pause to make sure that there is further discussion if desired. Is there any further discussion before we vote? Hearing none, we can all go to our board docs and take a vote to approve the consent agenda for this month.
I approve.
Thank you, Arlene. And Ms. Robinson, how would you like to vote?
I approve. I didn't see it popping up on my thing, but I approve.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So with 8 votes for all present, the consent agenda is approved unanimously. Thank you so much. And now we're going to move on to the next item, which should be the treasurer's report. I'm using a draft, sorry. Could Mr. Stump help walk us through a little bit of the treasurer's report this month? Please.
Sure.
And capital funds. Thank you.
I won't say too much about these reports. I suspect that next time we're going to have a budget mod to talk about, so we can get into a bit more detail about some of the specific areas that are going over or under. I will just reiterate that we are going to be providing balance sheets for both the general and capital fund going forward. So hopefully those are illuminating for everyone. If anyone has any questions on any of the reports, I'm happy to address them. I don't know that there's anything that that sticks out too significantly that we can't hold off on discussing until next time. But if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to address them.
Would you mind just pulling each one up on your screen really briefly before we move on, just so that we're making sure everybody gets a look, please? Or can Rebecca do that? Sorry. Or should we all go look? Okay, there they are. So for those of us who like to look at the bottom line, is that an appropriate thing to do? Or what should we be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is, I mean, I tend to focus on the percent of the budget expended, particularly in the expenditure side. So 39 for November. I mean, that's not too bad. We'll have the December numbers finalized soon, and I think we should be close to 50 or even under.
Great. And do any board members have any questions about this one?
I have a question about the balance sheets.
Sure.
So, and I bring this up repeatedly, and I know we're still working on it, but the balance sheet, the capital fund is money that was segregated in a different account based on what was allocated by the trustees. It's not the capital reserve fund. Is that what we call it?
That's correct. Yeah, the capital reserve is not.
That shows up on the standard balance sheet.
Right, and that sort of represents our fund equity, but not a cash balance that we have on hand.
But then capital fund also shows up on the full balance sheet on the top current assets. It's what, the fifth or sixth line down.
That's correct, and I believe that actually once we approve the fund balance amounts that we discussed at the finance committee meeting, I believe we're doing that this meeting. I'm actually going to make an entry to that will come off the balance sheet, and the retained earnings balance will decrease as well. I'm not sure that should actually be on the general fund balance sheet, since we are sort of accounting for it separately. So the fund balance numbers that we discussed in the finance committee meeting reflected that 341,000 being deducted from retained earnings, which is the unrestricted fund balance.
Okay.
So that was something the auditors left that there. I suspect the auditors would remove that from the balance sheet at the end of this fiscal year, but I think we can just as easily do it now since we are accounting for it separately.
Thank you, Adam. And do any other trustees, does that satisfy your question for now, Karen?
For now, yes.
Okay, thank you. Do any other trustees want to make a comment or pose a question about any of these reports in item 5? Hearing no further questions or comments, thanks so much for walking us through those, Adam. And
I have a question.
oh yes, sorry. Yes.
Could you go back to that last budget page? Okay. On the line for federal grants and aids, it looks like we are 153% expended. Could you explain that?
Yeah, actually,
That's actually not an expenditure, that's income.
right, that's revenue. I believe we got an additional.
If you remember, I believe some of it, did we get our central library funding, Adam?
We did get the LLSA. We got some of that. That goes into the New York State grants line.
Oh, okay, so it's
the
not
federal grant is E-rates, and I think we may have gotten.
Yeah, it looks like we're about 17,000 over what we estimated we were getting.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up a report here. It might just take me a second, so I can just pinpoint exactly what that is.
It very well could be the E-rate because of the change in the fiscal year. We actually received the check for the E-rate funding this year for last year's E-rate, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I know the majority of that is the E-rate. Sorry, it may take me a minute to pull up this report.
Okay.
I'm sorry, the software is just very slow when we're working remotely. So if you want to move forward, I could get the answer and just put it in the chat window, if that helps, or if you want to come back to me.
If you can just explain to me, what does this mean for us in terms of our overall budget?
It just, Arlene, it means that we've made more money than we expected, about 17,000.
Okay, I got that part, but what does it mean to us in terms of where our financial position overall?
Well, ultimately, it's kind of a drop in the bucket. I mean, I don't think it will end up significantly affecting the overall revenue totals as it relates to the overall budget.
Melanie and Rebecca, if Adam puts his answer in the chat later, is that now something on Zoom that people seeing this meeting remotely or later on would see?
In all honesty, I don't know. Give me a second and I will find it out.
Yeah, because I'm not sure if the public can actually see our chat anymore. I think that was just when we were in Google. But we would certainly, we could see the chat and we can certainly read it.
We can read it out.
Mhm.
I don't want to put Adam under so much pressure, but if you could go ahead and try and put something concise in the chat and we can read that out before we close out the meeting, that would be great.
Sure, yeah,
I'm
very close to just another minute.
Okay.
Yeah,
would that be okay, Arlene? So I'll put it out there one more time for line 5, which is the 3 items, the financial item. Do we have any other comments or questions? Okay, so hearing none, I propose that we move on. These are non-voting items, so I propose that we move on to committee and liaison reports. So first and foremost, item 6.1, trustees reporting out or any upcoming events. I know I'll kick us off. I know we have a group that meets in Center Square that's going to have a book talk, and I think the marvelous Lisa Albert is coordinating that along with Jay Deitcher. I don't know when, but we'll figure that part out. But that's exciting. Anybody else for a trustee report out?
I've been enjoying listening to the Albany Made podcast. It's nice to have different channels to get library information and to read, and programming, of course. And then I like podcasts generally, so I thank you for doing that. And I've been using Ancestry, so I'm really glad that Albany, the library, has decided to continue the subscription after UHLS decided not to. And my daughter continues to use the drop-off, the pickup curbside service, and she's very happy that it's there. She uses it a lot.
I'm so jealous, Karen. I can't wait till my kid is old enough to walk to the library and pick up his own books. It's really fun.
We're still working on that.
Oh,
I was gonna say, Karen, is she walking to Delaware?
She keeps saying that she's going to. I think the cold right now is sort of. She's like, "How long is it going to take me?"
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, it's probably Washington, but it's not open, right? So Delaware's
right.
We scootered to Delaware to get a bunch of Magic School Bus books the other day, and it was really cold, but it was really, really fun for us. In my report, that was going to be the only place I'm really going is school pickup in the library, and we've been really enjoying curbside. We do Pine Hills because it's on Teddy's way to school, and I got the the new David Sedaris book, which I had been waiting for, so I'm really excited.
Those are wonderful. Anybody else want to share out before we go to 6.2? All righty. So item 6.2 is the Upper Hudson Library System Report, which will be addressed by our Upper Hudson Library System liaison, who is Arlene Wang.
Okay, thank you. Well, we did not meet in December, and my first meeting with the Upper Hudson group was the November meeting, November 11th, and it was painful. As everybody's been reeling from the budget cuts, the meeting mostly focused on how they were going to deal with the 22% cut in funding that was coming our way. And so it was all about strategy and what they could do to maintain as much as they could in terms of services to the member libraries and support to staff. As it turns out, they had to make some cuts. So they cut the salary of all staff by 7%. At one point, retirement benefits, healthcare benefits had been eliminated, and they managed to find a less expensive program and be able to restore that. So that was kind of like the flow of the conversation in terms of, what it was they were going to be able to do to maintain staff and maintain services. They made some compromises in terms of staff time off. They gave like 18 additional days and compensation for budget reductions. And of course, the board wanted to have some insurances in place. So they asked that it would be handled on an accrual basis and that everything would be revisited, if monies were restored through the state budget. But that was the discussion. So I was administered the oath of office, and I was gifted the gift of being appointed to the finance committee, and I'll attend that first session tomorrow. So, but pretty much, the pain that I was observing in the letter that Scott had written and that Sarah had written and feedback that I got from other board members was all being experienced by the trustees at the Upper Hudson. They're all librarians and lovers of libraries, and, they were all feeling the pain. And so what I would like to do is, because I spoke with Nat after our December meeting. And I shared with him what that experience was, my first meeting with the Upper Hudson folk, and how painful it was, and how we were all on the same page in terms of what we all felt needed to happen to protect the member libraries and services and staff and all that. And so, my conversation with Matt was, and I wanted to share this with you guys now, in preparation for my meeting tomorrow, is that, wonder if we could collaborate with Upper Hudson and the member libraries in terms of how we might be able to advocate for change on behalf of our libraries. Tim Burke, the executive director, is also a member of the Regions Advisory Council. And I'm thinking that, and I know that libraries have been very active in advocacy for funding at the state and federal level. But I'm thinking that maybe we can make a strong pitch to the RAC, to the Board of Regents, to do something to help with the restoration of these funds, to make sure that there's strong advocacy, or at least we're lending some additional support to that effort. The other thing that I wondered if we might do is to seek some support from private foundations. Monies are being advanced from private foundations to entities that have been hit by COVID. And I think that there's a case to be made. And that is something that I would like to suggest to ALMS tomorrow, that the Upper Hudson folk, is that might be something that we consider talking to the Board of Regents. But the other thing is looking for funding from corporate entities that are very concerned about how different groups have been hit by COVID.
That's great, Arlene. And I'm sure you're just welcome with open arms. Everybody, a lot of people remembered you from when you were a liaison before. And I think your idea that instead of basically writing a complaint to Upper Hudson, that we collaborate with them and take that up to the Regions Advisory Council is a great idea. And I'm going to leave that in your capable hands as our point person on Upper Hudson. And I do agree with finding foundation funding. I'm not sure who could take that part on, because that's a big job. But yeah, it's something we need to think about. So thank you so much for that great report, and have a great meeting at the Upper Hudson tomorrow.
Thank you.
Any questions? Sorry, any questions for Arlene? Or Arlene, any more comments?
No, I just think that we're all on the same page. It's a good group, and you should know that you have family up there who feel just like you do and are pained by the cuts and the decisions that they had to make. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much. If there are no further comments or questions for Arlene, let's move along to item 6.3, Audit and Finance Committee report. Thanks again.
Thanks, Matthew. So the Audit and Finance Committee met last Thursday, January 7th. I'm just switching back to board docs so I can pull up my minutes. We had a very, very productive meeting. 3 items on the agenda, 2.5-hour meeting, and we got a lot done. The first item we took on was writing that committee description for audit and finance, the tasks that the committee typically handles on an annual basis that come up time to time. And we basically ended up writing out a bulleted list in chronological order. So for new trustees who maybe wonder what the Finance Committee does, or for a trustee who gets newly appointed to Audit and Finance, you can come on and read this description now, and it'll kind of lay out the year when we look at budget modifications as a committee before it goes to the board, when we look at drafts of budgets, and other things we do throughout the year. Rebecca has graciously put that committee description in board docs. If you haven't been there yet, we actually have a library section. So if you go to the library section of board docs, it's under the Finance Committee. You can see our description. The second thing we discussed as a committee, which took up probably majority of the meeting, was the board treasurer job description. The last description we have on file was actually from 2007. So we've been doing a lot of work on updating this description. So we did a little work prior to the committee, got together, really looked at our notes, got some questions answered, had more discussion. We have a few questions left on the table that we're going to go ask some outside sources on, but we're planning on having another Finance Committee meeting either at the end of this month or the beginning of February prior to our next board meeting to finish this job description up. And then the last thing we did was we approved a motion to reallocate some of the surplus funds from our stump year into the unassigned fund balance account. It's one of those three fund accounts that we have, and that will be under new business for the entire board to vote on. Since the committee has advanced this, it will just need a second in order to be voted on. And Scott has actually written a memo on that, and that's included under new business as well, if anybody has further specific questions about that piece. And with that, I can take any questions. I'm sorry, if Karen or Tom have anything to add about the committee meeting, please.
Derek Jones.
Nope, you did a great job, Sarah. Thank you for helping us get that work done. It was a very productive meeting.
It does sound like it was. Thank you so much. Great report. I'll probably like hearing the memo before we take that vote under new business, just so I'm kind of a little bit more clear on specifics, and that's a great way to do it. So thank you very much. Hearing no further questions and comments, we are going to move on to the Policy and Governance report from the Policy and Governance Committee.
I am on mute, and that is my the committee that I chair here. So the Policy and Governance Committee had a really productive meeting on December 9th. We've been working through the policy grid. We did discuss a little bit our committee description, and there's a draft of it that we have that's shared. And I think that because we had a lot of business to go through, we're going to work on finalizing that at our next meeting. We discussed a number of policies that did not require much change, like the employee safety policy and our purchasing policy, which we are submitting for, I didn't see them in board docs, but we're submitting those for approval without change, but we don't think that they require much discussion. We did have a little bit of discussion on the use of equipment and technology, we did make some revisions on the use of equipment and technology by staff policy. The change there was driven obviously by the way that library staff are going to need to change their interactions with personal technology and also with library-owned technology while working from home. And so we had to basically that had a pretty serious overhaul as we wanted to make sure that if you spill coffee on your library-owned computer, it's not necessarily like the library's fault or issue, or if you spill coffee on your home computer that you're using for library's business, we don't then have to buy your computer. Anyway, there's a lot in there, but we felt really good about the policy. It's not anything kind of up in the air or out there. The patron privacy policy was another one that got some keen attention. We wanted to send that to the full board for review and further discussion because we wanted to talk about the way that our library interacts with requests for information from outside sources. And so I think, is that in new business as well? It is not.
I don't see it, actually.
Yeah, so that's another one that we wanted to discuss with the full board. I can send it around if we need to.
Which policy?
The patron privacy policy.
I can add it.
Yeah, I think that and the room use policy.
That's on there. That's the room
That's
use
on there?
policy is listed as 6.5 for discussion.
Got it. Thank you very much. Oh, there we go. And then would you be willing to also add that the use of technology policy up if you're able to?
Yes.
Thank you very much. So all three of those, and I don't want to take up too much of our meeting here, but all three of those need to kind of be discussed by the full board because they did have some changes. The patron privacy policy, Trustee Dallas asked us to take a special look at because she wanted to make sure that, let's say, if police had a question about something happening at the library that was related to a patron's use of the library, that they had a warrant for that information. But I think Scott can speak a little bit to kind of the language in that policy and when we talk about it more for review. And then the last item that we talked about for a pretty significant amount of time was the room use policy. And one of the discussions that occurred in the meeting was, I don't want to spoil it for when we talk about it, but the way that we grant access to rooms and whether we should allow access to groups that promote hate speech. It is kind of a library bill of rights tenet that rooms be granted without sort of value judgments on. I don't want to, I think we'll discuss that more when we're at that kind of 6.7 area. But I think it's good. I think we should have a discussion about sort of what our rooms functions are and how we grant access to the library in a new moment. But at the same time, keeping with kind of the tenets of what a library's place in the community is. So it was a really interesting and enlightening discussion. And I'm excited to discuss the sort of policy changes with all of you.
Thank you. I'm glad it was productive. And does anybody have any questions or comments for Jenna?
I have a question before we get onto the specific policies. So
yeah,
where is the policy grid that wasn't shared in board docs? Is it somewhere?
I've got it. I can hold on.
It's actually in board docs. It is in the library under policy and governance.
And no, okay. We are pretty behind on the policy grid, which is why there were so many policies reviewed in our last meeting. We're trying to catch up by having meetings as frequently as we can and getting as many policies up to date as possible.
So I did find it, and thank you, and thanks for setting up the library, Rebecca. Once upon a time, there was a policy grid that listed all of the policies and then had the schedule for review, and I found that helpful. Is this all of the policies that we have? This is all the library policies? or just the ones that are on?
We have a
like,
policy grid with all the policies, and when they've exactly what you're talking about that exists.
I just find it helpful to know what all the policies are. So if you use both of them, that's fine. But it's nice to have a list of all of them.
I believe the policy grid that is there is all of the policies.
Is it okay?
That's listed in your library.
I think Karen might be referring to procedures, because a couple years ago I'm sorry, because I know when I was on the policy committee, we had a grid and I thought it contained policy and procedures and it was like twice as long.
It did, and that's why we removed them, because we wanted to keep it, streamline it to the policy discussions that would be discussed with this committee.
Gotcha.
All right. Well, thanks for clarifying that this is all the policies. That's where the format is. That doesn't. Whatever works for you guys is fine. I just want to make sure it has all of them and not just what's being reviewed next. And then the policies that we're going to be voting on, policies that you didn't make many changes on, but is that correct? I didn't see it on the agenda.
I think that I thought we didn't have to vote if we didn't make changes.
No, we don't. We don't have.
Yeah.
We don't
So
make-
I think we only have to.
Right. Okay.
I know it says that in the minutes, but I think that that's my fault because I didn't get a chance to edit the minutes. We only need to vote on the last three.
On the one that you made a change.
Yeah, use of equipment, patron privacy, and room use are the three that we need to discuss.
Okay. And have those been added? I only see room use on board docs. I've been trying to refresh. Have the others been added yet?
Room use is actually listed at 6.5.
Yep, I got that. But there's two
sorry.
other ones.
The other ones we're getting up. I just sent to Rebecca, and we should be getting those added soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, question on that. Sorry, question on that. Will all of those policies also be given a spot under new business as well, so that we can have separate votes on them? Will it be one vote? How do you want to structure this?
Be separate votes for each policy.
Okay.
For the policies that needed any sort of revision, they have to be voted on separately.
Okay. So those are going to be popping up under 10. New business.
I will let you know when everybody should refresh their screen, and I'm working on that as we speak.
Thank you so much.
Should we begin talking about room use since it's up there, and then refresh for the other two?
Sure. So I kind of want to take the temperature here. Do we want to go over them now, or do we want to go over them closer to when we vote, and you can tell us what we're going to be voting on?
Probably under new business.
No, I think that we would be voting as we do them, regardless of where it is in the, because it's in the.
So generally what happens if anything needs to be discussed, it's under the unfinished business. And then anything that we are actually voting on would go under new business. But if we're just discussing it tonight and sending it back to revision, it would remain under unfinished business.
Right.
So how would people
That's not how you would typically do that under Robert's rules, though, guys. If you're putting it up for the first time, it's under new business. If you vote on it, you vote on it. If you're not going to vote on it and it goes to the next meeting, then it ends up in unfinished. Everything should be in new business if you're going to vote on it.
Right.
Well,
and how do people?
New business.
Sorry. Yeah, how do people feel if we go on to the director's report and monthly stats and then come back to these when we're getting ready to vote, so that we're kind of fresh? We kind of review what we're voting on under new business.
Yes, that works out great.
Yes.
That's great.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Any more questions for Jenna? Okay, so hearing none, I'm going to ask our executive director to share his report with us, please.
So the library has been in phase 1B, curbside pickup plus virtual services, programs, and materials since December 8th. The library is averaging about 2 to 4 members of the staff being in quarantine per week. It's just something to note that could take out, that means stopping the operation of at least one branch if there's two of those cases alone in a building. The library has now had 3 confirmed cases. The good news is no transmission on site so far, according to the Department of Health. So that means that our precautions that we're doing seem to be working relatively well, but it does not mean we have not had staff members who are positive. There were 2 incident reports in the month of December. One was an unmasked member of the public who got into the Delaware branch and wanted a Spider-Man DVD. And then there was a health and safety issue with a staff member. That staff member is now fine. They just had an issue and it got put into an incident report, which is the right way to do it. We had 2 requests from the Albany Police Department regarding access to recorded video camera footage. They're aware of the policy and we're kind of working that out now with them. The new art at APL exhibit with Alpaca Gallery, Creative Curbsides, has been installed in the front windows of Arbor Hill, West Hill, and the Bach branches, and has received some really positive press and some really positive feedback. It looks really cool. Human Resources continue to navigate the changing world of labor laws and best practices during the pandemic. Facilities is reporting that the office project at Pine Hills has begun, which is a DLD, Department of Library Development construction grant funded project. And I was asked to join the New York Library Association Civil Service Committee, where we're gonna try to figure out a way to make civil service work so it's more inclusive and opens up our pool. Stats circulation saw a noticeable increase from November to December, where usually it drops. So Jenna and Karen's daughter, thank you. You guys, our circulation went up normally when our circulation goes down. And while not at the same level as circulation last year, we actually continue to inch closer and closer. Circulation is really where we're getting close to where we were, during normal times. And circulation transactions, which is a number that we follow because we feel like that provides us an idea of workload. Circulation slightly increased as well. So circulation can increase due to how many books somebody's taking out. Circulation transactions means how many people you're seeing at the desk. And that's my report.
Thank you,
awesome.
Scott.
You're going to be on the Civil Service Committee. I think that we need to work together to find creative solutions.
The group has already met. It's the chair of the group is Jeff Kirkpatrick from the Bethlehem Public Library, who has kind of been the go-to source for civil service. He's kind of the civil service guru. It was a really interesting conversation that we had, a long one, but I think everybody's on the same page about their concerns with civil service, which is it really limits who we can hire and it limits it not just through red tape, but there's systemic issues as well.
Thank you so much, Scott. Any further questions for Scott or comments? Hearing none, I did see in the chat that if we refresh our board doc, we'll be able to see all the voting items. We have a big list ahead of us, and it's 7:21. I try to be mindful of the time when we're meeting, so if anyone has no objections, shall we move on to new business?
Matthew, before you go forward, I want to read Adam's answer to
yes, the great time.
Arlene's question. So the federal grants revenue line is overstated. There are several journal entries previously made by the treasurer that needed to be corrected. The actual total as of November 30th will be $14,864. This represents 5/12 of the E-rate funds we received earlier this year. We recognize an equal amount as revenue of that revenue each month. Thank you, and with an exclamation point. Good eye, Arlene. Thank you for pointing this out. So it seems like it's a journal entry issue that needs to be corrected.
Yep, you'll see the correction on the next report. Sorry, I didn't catch that. I can tell you already the total federal grant revenue for the entire year will end up being right around 36,000, and we just recognize that revenue in equal amounts every month. So sorry about that. That was an error, and that will be corrected.
Thanks so much, everybody. And I just realized I was skipping over informational items. Are those items that, Scott, you wanted to walk us through quickly?
Sure. Let me just pull it up real quick. That was the one file.
So we're moving on.
My apologies. Informational items. So informational items, first was weather closings. I actually sent out an email to the Board of Trustees. Just with our weather closing procedures, we'll try to do that every year, especially for new trustees who haven't been through a weather related closing with us. They tend to happen more in the winter. We stopped calling them snow closures because we were finding that sometimes we were closing and it wasn't snow, and that was making for some confusion. But that item has also been included in the packet as well. Literacy New York, we're currently working on a user agreement with partner organizations. We've talked about this a little bit in past memos. This will codify the relationship and clearly outline both parties' responsibilities. Attached is a draft agreement with Literacy New York. This organization provides literacy and ESL classes at the Washington Avenue branch. We provide classroom and office space in return. There's no need for a board approval tonight. We will probably put it in new business next month and then hope to vote on it in March. FEMA grant, this is bad news. The majority of our claims, about $52,000 to date, have been denied for reimbursement. We assume that the remaining $6,500 will be reimbursed through the documentation libraries, though the documentation library received does not discuss it or when this will happen. We actually were contacted by them today, and we can appeal this decision, and we're working on whether or not we're going to go forward with that. Really sad news is we lost Steve Winters. He was a longtime patron, library supporter. Over the years, he was served as an executive director of Interfaith Shelter and the South End Improvement Corp. And he was active in the Capital Area Council of Churches and the League of Women Voters and the South End Neighborhood Association and the Second Avenue Neighborhood Association. Steve was a user of the library, a regular at the library, but also an advocate for library patrons. I mean, he was an advocate for the library, but he was an advocate for library patrons. He was one of those people that we knew was good. He would tell us exactly how it needed, how he wanted us to hear it. And we appreciated that. I've known Steve for as long as I've been a librarian, and he's going to be missed. And finally, he is finally remembered by the staff. We shared some stories and supervisors the other day, and we're going to miss him. And then the last piece, which is new, remember with information items, I'll do the information items memo Friday, but because this memo is about keeping you up to date to current library happenings, we add stuff on the day of the board meeting. This morning, I sent out a message. I'm not going to read the message, but I sent the message out to elected officials at state, county, city, and association levels, just advocating for the consideration of library frontline library staff, and not just at Albany Public Library, but frontline staff in general be included in phase 1C, which right now it looks like phase 1C is not going to happen until springtime, summer. My concern is that librarians are being left out of the conversation. So we got an email to the New York to the New York NYLINE, which is the email list for the entire state, and it was about everybody else getting vaccination and where they might be in the schedule. Librarians were not mentioned in that schedule. Not even school librarians were mentioned in that schedule, which bothered me as well. So I'm just really afraid that we're gonna, like in so many other things, we're gonna get left out. And in reality, we can't our libraries can't function the way we want them to until our staff are vaccinated. Response has been fairly positive. The mayor responded with a really positive message. The county executive's office responded with a very positive message. I also sent this to Fahey and McDonald. McDonald had a very positive message. Something member Fahey and I are having a discussion about a few things. I also sent it at an association level, but not to the executive director of the Library Association. I actually sent it to the president and also the president of the public library section. And I have a meeting with the president of the New York Library Association on Monday to discuss some of my concerns. From what I understand, NYLA is doing some work, but none of this has been communicated to membership. And we're a little concerned about that. And that's it for informational items.
Thank you so much for that update. Any questions about those comments? All right, then hearing none, I suggest that we start moving on to new business so we can get through our voting items today under item 10. So looks like we have 8 items to vote on. First one, pandemic operations plan. So who's going to be walking us through that?
I will be. Really, there's not much to discuss here. Board members did contact me with their concerns about it. We made the edits that were expressed in the concerns from board members. So nothing much has changed in this plan over the week. Hopefully you all reviewed it. Probably the first, let me open it up so that I can, some of it will look very familiar to you. However, the first probably 8 or 9 pages will be somewhat new information. This was based off a template that I got from a few system library directors, reached out to system library directors across the state because I had a concern that we weren't being instructed on how to do this. And we based this off a template that several system directors told me they were using. So what's important about this is it gives purpose, history, scope. That all pretty much looks familiar from our continuation of service plan. A situational overview for you, which looks familiar with what we had in the continuation of service plan. Planning assumptions, concept of operations, nothing new there from our COSP. Mission essential functions really lays out what the library views as mission essential. And also lays out what departments fall under mission essential. So that would be IT, facilities, business office, human resources, administration, public service, and public information. It sounds like almost everybody, but they're ranked in priority, and those are kind of in alignment with our phases. Then we have essential positions, and it looks like pretty much everybody is listed under essential positions. However, this does not mean we will be having the staff come in the building or following a regular schedule. So say we were to go into a pause again, we may need our IT people to go in every once in a while to check on the servers. We definitely need our facilities people to go in, check the buildings. Business office usually needs to go in to do payroll and cut checks. Human resources may need access to, files. There were a few times I needed to run in. Becky has needed to run in to do mail because we're not going to have mail delivered to my garage anymore because that was just a little bit of a headache for everybody, including Mrs. Jarzumbach. Public service, heads of branches, branch managers, all of these individuals we may send into the building because they need to empty a book drop. We're working all that out, but this is just saying who we would have in the building in case of a pause. But we would be doing it with scheduling that's redundancy scheduling and simultaneously still reducing the amount of time they're in the building and the amount of people in the building at the same time. So this is this is one thing that I like about this plan that we did not think of that I think is really good and really helpful. And it really gives a description of why these people need to be in the building. There's discussion about remote work. This was easy to write because we already had the policy. So thank you, board members, for putting this policy together. Personal protective equipment, we pretty much already had this laid out in our continuation of service plan along with cleaning and disinfection. There's a section human resources role. This pretty much lays out how we have been doing and will continue to do when staff members identify that they have gotten sick, how we kind of handle all of that. It's very in-depth, and this week proved that it works relatively well. Then our safety plans included, that's part of our continuation of service plan. Documentation of work hours, housing for essential employees. If the need arises, we will provide hotel rooms, but we will try to avoid that because that could be expensive. We'll try to coordinate with Albany County to help identify and arrange housing needs as well. We've included the administration succession plan. This was a document I think we came up with in January after I got sick. And this is really helpful. Actually, I've been advising other libraries to do that, and they're very happy about that. And this lays out our succession plan. If I was to fall ill and Melanie was to fall ill, who's the next person in charge? If that person was to fall ill, that's the next person in charge. So we had some foresight about this to do that. Then we included our state of emergency plan, which is the plan that the board has put into policy. And then our continuation of service plan, which we'll cover a little bit more of later because we've changed some of the metrics. We've included our COSP within our pandemic operation plan because we want one document for staff to look at. But this is the part of this document that will probably change month to month. There's a great kind of table in the beginning of this, which says date change, description of change, implemented by, I think that's really helpful for people to kind of look back and how we worked through this. I don't want to get into the phases just yet because that'll be a discussion later. Another component of this that's really important for the board to know about is the fact that, this plan has been developed with the input of CSEA Local 1000. We met with the union about a week ago. Their response was very positive. They had a lot of really good kind of things here and there they wanted to cover. We had a great conversation. It's probably the best meeting I've ever had with the union. So they were very responsive, and they actually said that, once the board approves this, they will have absolutely no issue with supporting this. And that is the pandemic operation plan at a glance.
Thank you so much. And does anybody have any questions or comments?
You said we're going to talk about positivity rate when we talk about the COSP?
Yes.
Okay.
So the board does need the vote to approve this.
So hearing no further questions or comments, I would like to see if we can get a motion on the floor to approve the pandemic operations plan.
I make that motion to approve the pandemic operations plan.
So moved. Thank you, and seconded. Thank you so much. Any discussion before we vote? Hearing none, why don't we all go over to our board docs and take a vote?
So yes.
Thank you, Arlene.
Yes, my motion is not showing up in board docs for some reason. The voting mechanism.
Okay, I will.
Thank you for the voice.
Dr. Robinson, thank you.
And
before I forget,
are you logged in? Because it might, sometimes you can follow, but if you're not logged in, it won't let you vote.
I am.
Yeah,
usually it works, so.
Thanks so much for the voice votes to make things run smoothly. And I don't want to forget to thank Rebecca for updating the voting items and everything here that we are working on here. Thank you so much. And the motion carries with unanimously with all present. Thank you so much. And we're going to go to 10.3, reallocation of funds. Who will be walking us through that?
Matthew, you skipped 10.2.
I can't count. Very bad. Thank you. This is the PEG board agreement. Is that going to be Melanie?
No, that's going to be me again. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
So this is just the agreement that we have that's due in March. I'm trying to actually get agreements done ahead of time instead of 3 months after they need to be renewed. This is we're currently working on user agreements. When we talked about this in information items, user agreements with all of the organizations that provide services in our building, and then we in turn provide space for them to do these programs. It's really one thing I've noticed over the 6 years I've been the ED is that we have a lot of quasi relationships that aren't in any agreement, and sometimes are abused. And PEG, the new PEG board, or the PEG board that Melanie was on, that she did a fantastic job on, that I am now on, this PEG board gets it. However, there has always been, I have to say, there was 4 years from the time the studio was open, some real issues with behavior in the studio, some real issues in use and abuse, some issues about trespassing by people who identified themselves as staff in the studio who were not, marijuana use in the studio, a knife was pulled in the studio once. It was a real issue, and kind of an issue that I inherited. So it's become a pet project of mine because I do believe in public access. So this agreement, I think, a little bit more clearly defines what our relationship is. We're a sponsor, and we should be treated as a sponsor. What should be recognized by the board and put out in the public is that we don't fund the PEG program, nor are we in charge of the PEG program, nor are we responsible for things that go wrong with the PEG program. So this agreement kind of more clearly outlines that, and this board, thanks to Melanie, really gets this a little bit more. So the agreement's in front of you. We've added it as new business, which means it doesn't have to be voted on tonight, but I would absolutely love to have it voted on next month so that I could bring it to the PEG board and maybe we can actually get the agreement signed in the month that it needed to be signed.
So thank you for showing that to us in advance of the vote next month. Any questions on the new PEG agreement? And we'll all have some time to look that over.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment. I'm really thrilled that we're moving in this direction to just make it explicit what the relationship is, what the responsibilities are, what policies they need to follow. I saw that in there. I'm really just really glad to see that this is happening. So thanks.
Thank you, Karen.
Kudos, yeah. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, we're going to move on to the next item, which is the reallocation of funds.
Adam, you want to cover this? Or you want me to cover it?
You want to do it?
I will do it. Okay, so just a reminder that we established a fund balance policy in October 2013. That policy was then revised again March 17th. We did not start following this policy until 2017 or 2018, actually. And that's kudos to Adam Stump. According to the policy, amendments or modifications of the fund balance must be approved by the Board of Trustees through a formal action. Can't lapse over a year, and this is to restrict or commit fund balances. And that needs to be done by a board resolution and a majority vote. At the end of the 2020 stub year, we realized about $1,022,990 in savings. Trustees, don't get too excited. Trustees are advised that 828,000 of these savings are due to the library recognizing debt service revenue, but not debt service expense during the stub year. So about $800,000 of that $1 million is because of the stub year and the voodoo of accounting. Additionally, $341,000 was moved from the general fund to the capital fund during the stub year, resulting in a net change in fund equity of $681,990. The administration is advising the trustees to move this amount to unassigned fund balance. Typically, we would move some of this into the capital fund. However, with the financial uncertainty brought about by the current pandemic, we believe it's wise to have ready access to the following funds. So remember, we have three different allocations for the fund balance. The first is the capital reserve. This is the money we use for our capital projects like building repairs, IT upgrades, vehicle upgrades. The second allocation is assigned fund balance usage, which is if you look every year in every budget, we actually recognize that there's some of the fund balance that we may need for the operation. So that's where that money is. And then the unassigned fund balance, which will now be about $2 million. That's what I call, the stacks of cash under the mattress in case of the run on the bank. Sorry. This is where you could tell I was raised by farmers. But that's our emergency money. And that emergency money is important not only for an emergencies, say that we don't get pilot payments this year because we haven't gotten them yet because of the county can't, due to something, then we know we have at least that $440,000 covered. We also go about 2 to 3 months where we're operating now that we've changed the fiscal year. We go 2 to 3 months where we're operating without getting the money ahead of time. So we need to have that money in reserve and easy to get out. Note the assigned fund balance represents the amount of fund balance usage we originally budgeted for the 2021 budget, along with $202,000 in the prior year encumbrances. So that's money that we were going to spend in the prior year, and due to COVID and supply chain issues, we have yet to receive some of that or have some of that work done. We plan to include this in the that's there. So if you have any questions, Adam and I will answer them. It's a lot.
And while you're thinking about questions, we're going to be entertaining a motion to approve moving $681,990 to the unassigned fund balance in 2021.
The finance committee has already put it forward.
Right.
So we just need a second.
We need a second. And you said that, and I completely forgot. Yes, we're looking for a second on that. Entertaining a second on the motion on the floor.
Second.
Thank you, Jenna. The motion has been seconded. Is there any further discussion before we vote?
I just wanted to note that just for board docs voting purposes, right now, the motion says motion was made by Matthew Finn. That will be corrected in the minutes to reflect the finance committee made the motion.
That's my fault. Thank you. All right, hearing no further comment, let's go to our board docs and register our votes.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, and the motion carries with all members present unanimously voting yes on moving that funding. Jenna had prepped us with some policies that we're going to be looking at and voting on. Jenna, would you like to walk us through the specifics of the room use policy, please?
Sorry, I was looking at the policy and couldn't unmute on the other screen. This is hard with one screen. So the use of tech equipment and technology by staff policy needed to be updated really to address how we're using technology now that there are, there's some additional need for equipment being used in the home or equipment being used in different ways. So I think it's a fairly straightforward policy. We discuss, there's talk about the need for some personal use of library-owned equipment, and that it will occur, but it really should be kept to a minimum, in part because, you know, people are at home and they may be working different hours and using equipment in different ways. And there's also a discussion of what is an authorized and what is an unauthorized use of library equipment, that I think is really important because, I mean, full disclosure, I'm on a Skidmore computer right now. This is a authorized use though, because this is considered service to kind of the community of libraries. So I'm trying to think what the other kind of key things that are different in this policy are.
And while you're thinking, I'm sorry, I went right to where we were discussing and looking at 10.5 APL use of equipment and technology policy.
Yes. One thing I'm noticing is we have to update cyber citizens is misspelled in there by accident. But we talk about, you know, you have to be a good cyber citizen. You can't start your Arbun business on a library computer, and that you shouldn't have an expectation of privacy in your email or your voicemail in library owned. So for instance, we as trustees are not gonna, you know, slander someone on our library accounts because we know that's foilable. The same should be something that employees are doing. And also we emphasize that library employees are not required to use personally owned technology devices to complete their daily duties, but that does sometimes happen. And that we, even if you are using your personally owned technology to complete a library duty, let's say you want to test out how you might use your cell phone to search the catalog because you are helping to troubleshoot as a patron. That doesn't mean that the library is then in charge of maintaining that device. And I think that's really key. So this is something that's been brought to you guys for discussion and review, because this was a pretty major change from the previous iteration of this policy. And so I'd like to bring it up for discussion. We have brought it to you as a first. So take some time to read it. And then we don't think that this particular policy as a committee needs a ton of revision. We just wanted review because it was a major change, if that makes sense.
What is the actual change? And I think I heard Bob asking that question as well. So in a nutshell, what changed?
I think we specified how the change about the use of personally owned devices. I have to go back and look at the old policy. I'm sorry. It's been about a month, but that was one area that I thought was really different.
Is there a red line available for people to look at?
Let me see what I've got.
Well, maybe it doesn't. Are you looking to have a vote tonight? If not, we can circulate a red line and people can look at it that way.
Why don't we do it that way?
I'm actually looking at the document. I'm sorry, because I uploaded the document and now I'm re-looking at it now. I somehow think the one change that we made actually was not included.
And I see some typos in it too, so I'm just wondering if this isn't the final.
No, I think it's missing. I think it's missing the one thing we had made. Our big comment was regarding, and I apologize for not looking into this deeper because I thought I sent the right file, but I can't seem to find the old file. It was under use of personally owned devices. We had included a line stating that any use of personally owned devices is allowed because we understood that there was going to be reasons why people had to do that, or would prefer to do that. Some people like their home setups better to do work on, but any technology support would be minimal. That the IT staff would not be involved in the maintenance of personally owned devices, even if they are being utilized for APL work, I believe is what
we do. say that though in the one that's up there. But I agree this has a couple of typos. So why don't you guys read it through and we can vote on it at the next meeting after we've had a personnel meeting.
That's a great suggestion. And if you have a chance, if someone from the committee could forward us to the board, something with some kind of color coding, like here's what changed. If you have some kind of documentation of that, that would be great. And I know Google Docs does offer revision history. If that would help you, you can do a previous version and save that previous version so that you don't mess up the thing that you changed. So that's great. So we kind of went through that document. Does anybody have any other questions before we bring that to the table next month? Okay, thanks for engaging in that discussion, and we will look forward to finalizing that next month. Are you ready to go to room use, or did you want to go to privacy?
We can go to room use.
Okay, so if we can all move to item 10.4, room use, which is listed as an action and discussion item. Jen, if you want to tell us what we are looking at, that would be great.
So the room use policy discusses how meeting rooms and study rooms are utilized by community groups and different agencies. It's something we've talked about in the past because, as we all remember, there was a party where they cooked fish in a room once, or, we've had people, have multi-level marketing sales in rooms at our library. And so we have to be very kind of specific about what the kind of uses that are kind of qualified for rooms in the library, and they can't be used for commercial purposes or for-profit purposes. You can't ask people, you can't make people pledge something specific in order to join your group when you're using a room. It has to be a free, publicly available, unless approved otherwise, and not-for-profit use of the rooms in the study spaces. Now, obviously, there are times when, for instance, a tutor uses a study space and they may be getting paid for that tutoring service. And so it's not intense the way that the library kind of uses this policy. But I think Scott wanted to discuss kind of some of the ways that we use rooms and how we allow different groups to use them. Scott, I'm sorry, I'm butchering this, but I should pass this kind of discussion item on to you.
So I'm the one who brought up this conversation, and this discussion was a great discussion. But I want to note this was before January 6th. We've been doing a lot of really great D&I work. Really impressed with who we hired, really impressed with my staff. It's not easy work to do, but it's really making me rethink some of the tenets of librarianship that we seem to hold so dear. And it's interesting, I got an email about a patron and they were quoting the ALA Bill of Rights, which I thought was fascinating. It's really and again, this is, if you ask any of my staff members, this has been something I've been talking about and talking with them for some time now. And I wish Sarah was here for this discussion because I am taking the polar opposite viewpoint from the library world. I also want to state I am not a member of the American Library Association. This is part of the reason. Misinformation is in the library. We still order books with misinformation. You'll find a copy of the Bell Curve. You'll find a copy of Mein Kampf. However, misinformation without context is really dangerous. A book, just by the format that it's in, by the preface, by the introduction, that is information with context. When we allow someone to use a meeting room and they're promoting, and this has happened, QAnon conspiracies, we are providing a space for them to provide misinformation, and we're amplifying their voice. And I know Bob's going to be disagreeing with me. I can already see he's getting ready.
It's not even disagreeing with you. I don't know what you're going to do to change it and stay within the Constitution, Scott.
Yeah, I just am concerned with if a group is meeting in the library, in some ways that automatically creates a barrier for others. I would not be comfortable going into a public library that allowed certain groups to meet in that building. And that's me coming from my level of privilege. I can only imagine how that feels for others and how that would feel in the community to know that the library is providing space for people promoting ideas that are beyond us. And this is a discussion that's getting very closely scrutinized in the library community. So I just wanted the group to think about it. I wanted the board to think about it. You know, we're doing a lot of D&I work, and I'm going to be tasking the board to think about things differently and a little bit more deeper. And I'm hoping that the library community does the same.
Are there changes in this room use policy yet?
No, there are not.
Okay. So this is the existing policy that you're talking about potentially making changes to.
Yep. I mean, I guess our question for you would be guidance on what the parameters that we can set.
You can close your public forum. You can make it so that there is no public forum in the library, but the only way you do that is to set rules that are applied to every group equally that essentially limit the use of the library facilities to the library. There is absolutely, you cannot do any viewpoint discrimination in making decisions of who does and doesn't use the group or the thing. Now, that's not to say you can't prohibit certain, categories of speech from occurring, but you can't prevent a group from accessing that based on a belief that they would engage in that speech. So in other words, you can stop misconduct in its tracks from when it occurs, but you can't preemptively discriminate against a group because you believe the viewpoint is likely to cause a violation of your policy.
So could it be we ask the group, are you going to be espousing the following ideas? And if they say yes, then are we able to say you can't use our space?
I don't think you can do that, no.
I'm starting to think about wedding cakes, and I think we're having a wedding cake discussion. So I'm pro everybody having a wedding cake, but there are some groups that would never go to a bakery that allows same-sex couples to get a wedding cake. The bakery would lose business from those people. So, a bakery that makes things that I find repugnant, maybe guns or gun cakes or something, I would not want to go to that bakery. So it is all kind of a point of view thing. So I think it's very tricky.
Well, whatever you do, you can, first of all, if you're going to continue to have an open forum, then your policy is written correctly. If you're going to try and restrict your forum, you need to be able to restrict it in a manner that every single group that makes use of the things is treated the same way. And the measurements of what the forum is cannot themselves be discriminatory, or violative of the First Amendment. That's the rule in a nutshell. It's terrifically hard to try and legislate this stuff in a manner where you say we're not going to allow people who, preach white supremacy in, but we are going to allow people who, do something less offensive in. It's just the courts have ruled on it over and over again, and frankly, I hate to say it, but it's going to be a few years before you get some balance in the judiciary again. You don't have a federal judiciary that's going to be particularly supportive of something like this right now.
And this has came up before too. I mean, the same topic, and I'm glad that Bob's kind of consistent with his responses. And I know the world seems to be getting worse and worse instead of better, in my opinion, in regards to behaviors, racism, folks being so strongly vocal with such small minds. But we still have to be careful on how we move forward with the library and making sure that we are, I think, fair and equitable in the moves that we make as well.
And it's not that we can't limit it. We can put limitations on. We just have to be very consistent in what those limitations are.
We don't want to put a limitation where it'll also hurt others and decrease their ability to use the library as well. So it's kind of a tightrope. And really I find it to be very difficult.
That's exactly right, Brenda.
What worries me about, oh, I'm sorry. So what worries me about this is that because it would be diverging from the Library Bill of Rights, at which, like, I get it, I'm ducking my head in the turtle shell of kind of standard library takes, but we wouldn't have a model to write a policy that took this approach. And I said, you know, like, I'll punch Nazis on the weekend, but I'm afraid of doing it in an official way that would then maybe lead us to some sort of legal challenge because we were the only library not the only library necessarily, but the only library I know of taking this stand in our room use policy. I'm just not sure I want Albany to be the first.
So what was the expectation bringing this forward in regards to making changes? I know Scott stamped on it, but what are you looking to do here?
It didn't feel to me like something that the committee could say, I don't want to make this change. I wanted this to be a discussion with the whole.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Could somebody remind me?
Sorry, I feel like Brigitte got her hand up as well.
Yes. At the time that we were discussing this, the topic, I know I'm the new person on the block here, but at that time last month, I was saying everything that Robert was saying as far as constitutional right and stepping on, infringing on other people's rights. But then January 6th happened. So my stance has changed, but as far as what is the liability that the library would endure if you had someone who has a group and you couldn't police them as far as what they were going to say. They get in the room, they come out, they're all frizzed up, and Joe Small is on the computer that doesn't look like them, doesn't act like them, and they attacked Joe Small. So what is the liability? What is the liability, the library's liability in that respect? Because we provided the space. And in essence, we were complicit because we knew already what it was all about.
I think there's a lot of extensions there. The mere fact that a group meets in the library and then commits a violent act, the level of duty that's on the library in that circumstance seems to me to be very low because there's several intervening intentional actions there, right? So we'd have to know that there was some reason to believe that that group was not only prone to violence, but likely to be violent at that time. And so that's a different story, by the way, right? If we have some reason to believe that a group is going to engage in violence at the library, we don't prohibit the meeting room use, we call the police. So the issue that you have is, I think ultimately you can put a lot of things in your patron code of conduct that you can enforce. And one of the things that you potentially could put in a patron code of conduct and enforce it is a statement with a good definition, and we'd really have to work on this, that says the library does not tolerate hate speech, discrimination, violations of individual liberties or rights, things like that, something to that effect. And then if a group used the library and engaged in that, they could be removed and they could be banned. But doing it based on what you think a group might say or talk about is where you're going to get into trouble.
Let me ask this question.
You know, or by the way, one last thought though, real quick before you do, or you can close the forum, which means essentially take away public use of the meeting rooms.
Sorry to interrupt, but I promised Sarah to also be able to ask a question after Brigitte. Sarah, would you like to speak to Arlene, or did you want to pose your question now?
Oh, if I could real quick, and sorry about earlier, Brigitte, I didn't see your hand up. I can only see a couple people on my screen. I was just wondering if somebody could remind me, I feel like we revisited this policy possibly 2 years ago. I feel like there was another possibly national or local incident with protests that occurred. Does anybody remember off the top of their heads exactly what that was the last time we discussed this policy? Thanks.
That was Cuban Solidarity, which is a group that has met in our building, I think, for the last 40 years. And they had a birthday celebration for Fidel Castro, I believe, or a celebration of his life because he had just passed away. We were asked by a handful of members in the community to not allow the program to take place. What we did and what Melanie did masterfully is we allowed them to come and protest. And we told them that they could protest in the front of the building. That was absolutely fine. And if they came inside with their signs, they just couldn't be loud or be disruptive. And I believe, because I was in a meeting at City Hall, Melanie handled the majority of this. And we said, as long as you don't break library policy, we're not going to kick you out.
Yeah, they couldn't impede people walking into the building, and they couldn't harass anybody coming in because that would have broken our policy. We do, I just want to state that I did post a link to the behavior policy in the chats, and that's up on our website, and it does include most of this information. We also did include something in our display and public notices policy about hateful languages. And I know at one point there was a discussion about including that hateful language and personal attacks and harassment into the behavior policy, but I don't think we ever got to that point.
One more follow-up question. How did the group that decided to protest this event, how did they find out that the first group had booked the room? Was it a public calendar or just online they had posted?
They saw, I believe they either saw a Facebook post or a flyer by the organization. So this was not a library sponsored program. This was room use.
Right. So unless you post it on Facebook or something privately, like as that group outside of the library, nobody else would know about it.
Yeah, because it's like the times you're in a couple groups that have used the library space.
Sure.
So I'll use Vegan Action Network as an example. It would be like when you guys use the space, we don't publicize it for you, but I know you, because you get good numbers, I know that you publicize it yourself. That's how these people heard about it.
And people do also post, we do allow them to post flyers in the library stating that they're meeting in the library, but they have to do that on their own. We don't do it for them.
We have a policy regarding what can be placed on a flyer, right?
Yep, that's our display of public notices.
Perfect.
Policy.
Thank you, guys.
And I believe in that case, just so you know, for precedent purposes, we did have one group that met in the library that did have an objectionable image on their poster about meeting, and we did, I forget if we had them take down or redo their poster or if we did deny them meeting room use because of that. I forget which path we chose, but that was something. We do have precedents that we did censure them in some way.
Okay.
Thanks so much, and I want to make sure I don't forget Arlene, who has something to say.
Thank you. I have a question. What if we had a situation where people wore provocative wear? For example, if you had a group that came in with Nazi paraphernalia or Klan paraphernalia, those would be upsetting images. How would you manage that?
So we had a situation where we had an individual who had a swastika on their clothing. I want to say this was 2 or 3 years ago. You know, we had enough patron complaints that individual was asked to leave. He was also provocative and kind of putting it in people's faces and making comments, which made the situation easier to handle. But
oh, okay.
He was causing a disruption.
Yeah.
What did you say, Robbie?
He was causing a disruption.
Okay, so if someone came in with Klan gear and they were having a forum, then we would consider that disruptive?
Not necessarily. There'd have to actually be a disruption.
Well, I would think that if they showed up in Arbor Hill or South End wearing a hood, that would cause a disruption.
And if it did, you would deal with it as a breach of your customer behavior policy. But if it didn't, it's a free speech issue, right?
That would fall probably under engaging in loud, aggressive, or threatening conduct, fighting or challenging another to a fight, using profane language or obscene behavior, or engaging in harassing behavior of any kind.
No, I don't think it would at all, Mel. Not without something more.
Okay.
Merely wearing a hat, a hood, is not going to violate that rule.
When a fight breaks out, because.
Well, I think that Arlene. Sorry, I think Arlene means like a Klan hood, not like.
I understood what she meant.
Yeah.
Oh.
Still clear.
That's what he's saying. He's saying just wearing it without, if somebody came through and walked through.
So what I would suggest is, you're not the first library board to wrestle with this issue. I think that everyone seems to have very clear agreement on the fact that we'd like to try and figure out something that we could do. And so I would just say that we should work on that, and trying to figure it out here tonight without the benefit of really working on language is going to be impossible.
And before, I know Karen wants to speak, I just want to make, since I'm the one who kicked this hornet's nest, really what I want to see is just this board and this organization be much more intentional about how they come at this situation and this problem, instead of just the Constitution and the ALA Bill of Rights. We can't touch it, because I think what that says to our patrons who pay attention and to our staff is that we're not willing to answer the hard questions or really take on, and I know this isn't true, but that's the statement we're making. That's why whenever the ALA Bill of Rights comes up, I get my
hackles up.
I don't want to say hackles. I get tense because we're just in a world right now where that the slippery slope argument no longer works, because we've slid right down the slope by being afraid of the slippery slope. And I'm sorry, Karen. I'll let Karen speak.
Well, that's along the lines of what I want to say, and I agree with Brigitte that, what happened last week, the attempted coup, showed that some of these groups were conspiring to break the law and to violate the government. So I'm actually not seeing on this list, maybe because it's so obvious, but that the rooms must be used for lawful purposes. So
It's
that
included.
It is. I didn't see it when I looked quickly. Okay.
I believe any illegal committing any act that would violate state, federal, or local law, an ordinance or regulation.
Okay.
Including light treason.
Where are you reading that? No?
That's under the behavior policy.
Oh, okay. That's why we're not seeing it.
So that's include, but they have to follow the behavior policy.
So I just couldn't see where you were reading from.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah, that's
well, I mean, sure, they have to follow the behavior policy, but if we could reiterate it by maybe making a bigger statement by having it in the room policy as well. making it really clear that, you know, you can't you can't conspire against the United States government in, you know.
If I'm quiet and I wear a suit, I should be able to.
Well, hey, look, you know.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on what Scott said too as well. For me, I don't quote the ALA Bill of Rights, nor am I afraid of a slippery slope, but I am mindful of changes that are made with good intention that severely disenfranchise others. So we just have to be aware of that.
Very, very well put. Thank you. I agree. I mean, that's kind of where I was going with my wedding cake thing. So I think Bob is right that we need to all discuss this further. And I'm really glad that we started to think about it really deeply. Thanks for putting it in here. I know we are getting over our usual time, but I would like to ask that next time I'm sorry, can everybody hear me? I don't think I'm on my speaker thing anymore, but I would like to ask that the next time you're going to discuss it in P&G, that you put that out to the full board, that you're going to be talking about it in case people want to join in on that meeting and have more of this rich discussion.
I believe that we probably will be addressing it at our next P&G meeting. So I'll make sure to send out a bat signal when that's coming up. The P&G committee, I know I speak on behalf of Brenda and Brigitte, my lovely bee ladies, that we really appreciate the guidance from the full board, and also Scott for making us have kind of hard discussions. And I think that we have some really good guidance now from both of these discussions to hopefully bring completed policies to the next full meeting.
Great. Yes, and I love that a lot of this is in the behavior code, and maybe that could just be kind of pointed back that way, part of it. So that's a great discussion, really useful for us to have. And the next one that we have on deck is 10.6, and that's the privacy and confidentiality policy. This is also an information item. Does someone from the Policy and Governance Policy Committee want to walk us through that one?
I feel like you guys have heard too much from me today, though. So this is something I was really hoping Sarah, do you know what, could we kick this to the next meeting? Because I would like Sarah to be here, since she is the one who kind of brought this up to P&G. Essentially, we just had a discussion just to kind of prep you all about the way that the library shares records with police. Brigitte, I know you were kind of, do you have anything to contribute to this as we kind of prep our colleagues for this discussion? Not to put you on.
I apologize. I didn't have that in the
I could speak to it a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't have that in the packet, and so I can't remember. I think that it was something in reference to releasing information to the police as far as who comes in the video and things like that.
So essentially, there's a question on release of video footage to the police department. Generally, if a crime or something has happened on library property that we are aware of and that we have reported, we're obviously forthcoming with the police in their investigation when they've asked for video footage. There have been the occasional times where something has happened off library property and they've asked for footage, primarily in this case of exterior camera footage from, some of our exterior cameras, because they think they're trying to create timelines of when somebody might have walked in front of the library. And in the past, what we've done is, since it is exterior cameras, we've allowed with written writing or written request from the police department, we've released those footages as long as it's within a very specific request. So this this library at this time on this date, and we provide them with that material. We feel because it's exterior footage from the outside of the library, it fell under FOIL, and they went through proper FOIL requests by putting it in writing. But there is concern that it's would fall more under the privacy and confidentiality of library records, where in that case it would not be allowed. And if you look at the first paragraph under policy, it does say, under state law, library records which contain names or other personally identifying details regarding the users of public libraries, including but not limited to records related to the circulation of library materials, computer database searches, interlibrary loan transaction, reference queries, requests for photocopies of library materials, title reserve requests, or the use of audiovisual materials, films, or records shall be confidential and not disclosed except when necessary for the proper operation of library, or disclosed upon the request or consent of the user or pursuant to subpoena, court order, or were otherwise required by statute. We felt that it wasn't a library use because it was a patron, or it was technically not necessarily a patron. It could be a non-patron walking in front of the library. And like I said, it's pretty much has been excluded to exterior camera use. I think there's been once where we included interior, and because the crime started off library property, but then ended up on library property, it continued through the library. So then we did release the footage in that case to the police. But so we just wanted it clarified. At this point, we are taking it upon the suggestion of some members of the board to narrow in on that policy, to have the request done by court order, subpoena, or warrant. The police are okay with that, but they did want to also voice their opinion that they feel that it's an exterior camera and there's no right of privacy in that case. But they would be willing to follow through with what we request or what we have in our policy.
Sorry to interrupt you. So is this another item that will be continue to be worked on at the next Policy and Governance Committee meeting?
Yes.
Oh, great. So I would suggest, to respect everybody's time, that if anybody has any comments or questions about this, watch for the next Policy and Governance Committee meeting, and you will be able to work on that because this will come back to the floor. Hearing no further comments, that burning fire that wants to be talked about tonight on that, thank you for agreeing to take up those questions at the committee meeting. I suggest that we move on to 11, the update of the cost plan, which will involve a vote.
There's actually 2 more policies.
I was going to say we skipped
under new business.
Did we skip? I didn't refresh
the service to children policy.
We've if you refresh your screen, service to children has been removed, so it's just APL purchasing policy 10.7.
Purchasing. All right. Sorry, folks.
I don't
one more policy to cover.
That there were major changes to that, so I don't think that we.
The only thing that was discussed was the change in thresholds for purchasing.
Oh yes, thank you, Melanie.
There was a there was a consideration to up the purchasing thresholds.
Yeah, and I think that we discussed this at P&G, and we are in favor of upping those thresholds. Things are more expensive, and it makes sense to take a look at them and adjust.
So did you move that to the floor for this meeting, and you're looking for a second? Mm-hmm. Could you give us just a little bit more detail about the thresholds in case anybody needs it in a real quick nutshell?
Let me look. I don't remember how much we upped by. I don't believe it was significant.
Okay. From what to what? I would want to.
Yeah. Let me just look at it. I apologize.
Sure. I'm scrolling through myself.
Keep ending up out of the meeting again. Board docs.
So I believe on the policy itself, we didn't make any, what you have in front of you, there were no changes because we wanted it to be discussed what we thought would be the appropriate limits in this meeting. That's why there's no changes on what you see in front of you itself. That was what was wanting to be discussed.
May I suggest, in the interest of time, that this go back to the committee, and if any board members would like to be involved in the discussion of the threshold limit, they can attend the committee meeting.
Matthew, can I just add one thing?
Sure, of course.
I just want to give the P&G committee a heads up, actually, because in the finance committee, we're talking about the check signing policy, and that led to a couple other conversations. So things might get added to the purchasing policy, but we can have that conversation offline.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. So it makes even more sense that we kick this back to committee. Does anybody object to that?
No, that's a good idea.
Thank you so much.
No.
Hearing no objection. Now we are moving on to 11, the continuation of service plan, the cost.
We are
Thank
making.
you. Sorry, just one last thing. Thank you to P&G. That's a lot of work, and you're catching up on the policies and governance. Thank you so much. Thank you, Scott.
So in the packet is a continuation of service update for January. It touches on the pandemic operation plan, so I'm not going to go over that since we've already looked at it, but there are some changes that we are suggesting to the continuation of service plan. And this is with the guidance of CDC, WHO, COVID Act Now, and several state libraries throughout the country who have great guides for libraries in how to operate during a pandemic. We also consider our experience observing our own operations, what we believe is safe over the last 10 months, and also looking at what other libraries have been doing across the country. We feel the following changes will ensure safe operations for staff and patrons while allowing additional library services or reintroducing library services a little bit quicker than last go around. I will say I want to thank this board for being understanding. I know 6 months ago when staff were saying, hey, we're probably going to have to go in reverse. I can tell you most people in the library community thought that was a ridiculous idea and were angry with us for saying it. But this board was very, I just want to thank all of you because I think you were very forward thinking and supportive of the hard decisions that the administration of the library needed to make. So we're proposing the following changes. Phased approach to public library service, page 18 of the pandemic operation plan section moving forward. We want to move our metric to a 7-day rolling average. Have 7 day over a 14-day period. Originally, we were using the metric of what was reported every day. 7-day rolling average, as we learned over the holidays. 7-day rolling average is less sporadic. So what happened was we were very close to entering the next phase. And because of Christmas, the number dropped considerably because no one got tested on Christmas, and that reset the clock. So we looked at the 7-day rolling average and we looked at the 14-day rolling average. We feel like the 14-day rolling average is kind of lagging. So the 7-day rolling average is really the metric we'd like to follow going forward. Also in that part of the plan, language clearly defines the process of how moving from phase to phase will be handled. We're not going to skip phases. We're always going to stay at least 2 weeks in the next phase, either going backwards or forward. And yeah, clarification that we will stay in each phase for 2 weeks. The reason why we want to stay in each phase for 2 weeks is because that gives us the ability to plan on the next step. So I don't want to say that it's a miracle. Everybody gets vaccinated in 2 months. All of a sudden, the number goes from 9% to 3%. I don't want to force us to go, into phase 3A after sitting in phase 1. We need planning. We need to get our staff ready. We need to get our facilities ready to be open. The next change is the phased approach to public library service on page 19. In the section moving in reverse, it's the same language. Again, there's 2 components of the COSP: moving forward, moving backwards. That language matches. Addition to human resources role. This is on page 11. This area has been outlined is to outline the role and responsibilities of the human resources department. It also establishes a protocol of how staff quarantining is to be handled. So we've really kind of laid out how we're going to handle that based on feedback we got from DOH and just our own experience and what we're seeing from the CDC. And all of these things are going to change. All of these numbers, I think, are going to change again as we've learned over the last few months. So then we're also asking for changes to the phases. So this is page 18 to 23 in the pandemic operation plan. Several phases, we're suggesting several changes to the metrics attached to the phases. Language describing the phases has been cleaned up and clarified. And also we've reduced phase 5 because it was redundant. So first is pause, which is positive tests over a 7-day average. We're now asking for that to be 14%. So if we were to hit 14%, which is possible with the trend in the numbers, that would mean that we would go back to a full pause with only virtual library service and very limited, again, as the pandemic operation plan outlined, there are some staff who will still need to report into the building, but our goal is to always schedule them in a way so that there are not multiple people in the building at once or without a 1-hour window. Those staff members would be coming in to check on the buildings, making sure the technology is up. So the next change would be phase 1A. We're asking for that to be moved to 10.1% to 14%. That is staff in buildings. A and B weeks continue staffing and redundancy. But the amount of time in the building is reduced. So again, you may not be doing your full 7 days in the building. You may only be in the building for 3 days. So this is a pause, but this allows us to do work in the building, like having the book drops open, do bin processing, and just kind of do that work, receiving bins from Upper Hudson Library System. Then there's phase 1B, which would now be 6.1% to 10%. That's the phase that we're currently in. If we're to follow the old plan, then you'd be getting an email from me tomorrow saying we're shutting down. So this kind of gives us a little bit more room to provide curbside services. Then plan 2A, which this is a big change. We'll actually be opening up the buildings to patrons a little bit earlier. We'll be doing it at 6%, and that'll be appointment services inside select branches. Remember, we say select branches because with redundancy scheduling, we don't have enough staff to operate all of the branches. So appointment services, which before was below 3%, will now be between 3% and 6%. Phase 2B, which is select branches open with a strict head count, that'll be 3% to 2.1%. Phase 3A, which is all locations open with strict head count. That means getting rid of redundancy scheduling. That'll be done when the positive test rate, the rolling 7-day average, is between 2% and 1.1%. Then phase 3B, 1% to 0.51%. Regular hours at all locations with strict headcount. And then 4A would be between 0.5 percentage point and 0.26%. That's unrestricted regular hours. So we're seeing a little bit more regular operation of the library. And then phase 4B, which is below 0.25%, new normal. And then phase 5, we're eliminating. Just to kind of 3 metrics there are really important to think about. The World Health Organization recommends a positive test rate of less than 10%. So that's why we have that 10% metric for curbside delivery. The WHO also says countries that are successful in containing COVID-19 have below 3%. So that's why we have that 3% metric for branches to be open with a strict head count. And then 1% indicates a maximal return to normalcy that is variable prior to herd immunity or widespread vaccination. So we kind of use those three metrics in that way, following what we're hearing. At COVID Act Now is kind of the resource that I've been using a lot, and they just merged with COVID Exit Strategy. And they've been on the mark since they started. I think they started like 3 months into the pandemic, and they seem to have the most consistent information provided to us. The other part of the memo is just patron feedback from the community. We did have an email, and this was while I was on vacation on the 26th. Melanie responded really well, just about a patron's unhappiness with us not being open, which we totally understand, and some incorrect interpretation of how we are moving forward.
Corrected by Melanie.
Yeah. That's it. It's a lot of changes, but most of those changes is one, what metric we're going to follow, which is still positive test rate, but just with a rolling average. So there, it's a little bit less. 837. I'm sorry, I'm losing words. I've been losing words all day. It's less sporadic. Yeah. And, the other changes is just, again, when we start to reopen, which I think we will in a few months, is we feel, and this has been vetted by the supervisors, and this was presented to staff as well. So this isn't news to them, but this is what we're comfortable. We think, based on our experience over the last 10 months, we're comfortable with this approach. It's still a slow approach. It's still a careful approach, but we think we're safe to operate within these parameters using these numbers.
Thank you, Scott. I, for one, find the cautious approach that we've been taking all along to be the wisest, and I really appreciate all the effort it takes to put these steps and phases together. Before we seek a motion from the floor to approve the updated cost plan, are there any questions or comments for Scott? Karen?
So I just noticed that the COSP's pause numbers are not updated the same as the POPs.
Yeah, so this will be included in the POP tomorrow.
Right, the POP is updated, it's the COSP that's not.
Yes.
Okay.
So you're talking about the COSPA that's on the website?
That's in board docs.
Okay. Oh, yes. Okay, yes. So that's an old version. Yeah. So that's from 12.8. So these changes are reflected in the POP and not the continuation of service plan that's attached. Thank you, Karen.
Okay, just want to make that note when we approve it that this is what we'll be voting on. And I thank you for upping them, because I was worried we'd be closing sooner. And I think the fact that you said that there's been a few COVID cases and there's appears to be no spread in the library is another reason why it's reasonable to up the numbers, because what you're doing is working.
And I just want to say that, the staff are supportive. The staff are concerned and want to serve the public. So, these changes were made hearing feedback from all of you over the last few meetings, but also hearing from the staff themselves saying, we don't want to stop doing curbside. How do we keep providing services? So I just want to commend the staff for thinking of patrons and putting sometimes patrons ahead of themselves.
Any other comments or questions before we seek a motion from the floor? Hearing none, I'm going to seek a motion from the floor to accept the updated cost plan with the proviso that the threshold numbers will align with the pandemic operations plan that we saw earlier in the meeting. Do we have a motion?
I make a motion.
Thank you.
I make
So
a motion.
moved by Trustee Pryor and seconded. Whoops, I didn't see who that was. Was it Dr. Robinson? I'm not sure. Hopefully Brenda caught that. Before we vote, are there any further questions or is there any further discussion? Okay.
Can I just
Rebecca,
clarify? You said Dr. Robinson was the second?
No one answered me, but I thought so. Can anybody confirm? Oh, I'm sorry. It was Trustee Way.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Were you able, Rebecca, to update the language of the threshold numbers being part of the POP? The language of the motion?
The motion is the motion to accept the continuation of services plan with the updates as described in the January cost update memo. So the memo covers
Gosh. Beautiful. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Hearing no further discussion, let's go vote.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Robinson, are you able to see it or will we get a voice vote from you as well? All right, and the motion carries with 8 members present, voting unanimously. Wonderful. Now we get to the fun part. We're not going into the executive session. I got lost. Where am I?
I think that's
I closed out. I closed my board docs.
Public comment, Rebecca?
Public comment.
Public comment, that's it.
We have
I'll
no
use my paper again. No public comment. All righty. So, yes. Anything else? And now there's no executive session planned, so we get to vote on adjourning the meeting. Do we have a motion from the floor to adjourn the meeting? From Trustee Patera, so moved. Second. Coming from Trustee McCarthy, thank you so much. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I will do a voice vote because I accidentally closed out my board docs. I vote aye. I like that archaic aye.
Yes. Aye.
And the motion carries with all members voting aye unanimously. Thank you, everybody. So sorry about the long meeting. One of my goals is to make them try and be reasonable in the timing. So we'll keep working on it. We didn't do too well today, but thank you, everybody. And have a great rest of the evening.
You too. Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Quick
All right.